Hello friends, how are you feeling tonight? I hope your body is relaxed and your mind is calm. If sleep feels far away, this story might help you drift gently into rest. Tonight, we're traveling back to the very dawn of time, when the world was young, when humans wandered beneath endless skies, and when the first spark of civilization flickered in the dark. It was a time of discovery, of fire and soil, of rivers that whispered to those who would one day build cities upon their banks. So, close your eyes and let your imagination carry you there. Listen softly as we step into the ancient world, to witness how the first villages rose from dust, how humanity learned to plant, to build, and to dream. If you enjoy stories like this, calm, timeless, and full of wonder, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Now, let's begin. The birth of civilization. Night lingered over the vast silence of the earth, when no city lights yet scarred the horizon, and only the moon poured her silver glow across rivers and stones. The wind moved softly through tall grass, whispering to the wild creatures that hid within. In that deep quiet, scattered fires burned faintly, glowing like small stars fallen to the ground. Around each fire, figures huddled together, wrapped in furs, guarding the flame as though it were life itself. These were the first people, wanderers between shadow and dawn, their hearts still bound to the wilderness that had shaped them. They did not know of civilization, or kingdoms, or even names. Their world was made of hunger, of cold, and of endless movement. Yet beneath that fragile existence, something ancient stirred. A quiet thought, a spark of awareness, the first whisper of humanity's awakening. When dawn rose, it painted the sky in colors no one had yet named. The hunters stood on ridges, spears in hand, watching herds that grazed below. The women gathered roots and seeds. The children followed, learning the old paths across the plains. Life was harsh, but it was known. Every heartbeat, every movement was part of a rhythm older than memory. They slept beneath the stars and woke with the cry of birds. They spoke little, yet their gestures and glances carried meaning. A shared fire, a shared meal, these were their first laws. In their silence, something sacred lived. The first tools were simple stones, shaped with patience, sharpened through need. With them, they cut wood, hunted, and built small shelters of bone and hide. Around their fires, they began to tell stories of beasts and storms, of rivers that never ended, of ancestors who became stars. The stories were not written, but they lived within memory, passed from one generation to the next, like flame from torch to torch. In those quiet nights, humanity learned imagination. When thunder rolled across the sky, they feared it, yet within that fear was wonder. They began to look upward, to question what lay beyond. Perhaps the first prayer was nothing more than a gaze toward the heavens, a silent plea for safety beneath the storm. The firelight danced on their faces as they watched sparks drift upward like souls returning to the stars. They felt the world breathe around them, the wind, the rain, the warmth of the sun, and within that breath they sensed their own existence. They began to understand that the earth provided, and that their survival depended on her moods. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a bond formed between humankind and nature, not of mastery, but of respect. They learned to follow the rhythm of seasons, to travel with the herds, to listen to the sound of the sky. Beneath the soil where they rested, seeds sometimes sprouted. Perhaps by chance, perhaps by curiosity, someone noticed that food could grow from the ground. It was the smallest of discoveries, yet it would change everything that followed. But before that change, before fields and villages and kings, there was this, the time of whispers, when all knowledge was dream and every discovery felt like magic. The nights were long and danger was constant. The darkness beyond the fire held eyes that glowed, teeth that waited. Death walked close, and every sound in the forest could mean the end of a life. Yet still, they gathered each night around the same circle of light, tending the same flames. That circle became their first community, the first fragile shape of what would one day become society. Around it, they learned sharing, cooperation, and the comfort of belonging. They began to realize that together, they were stronger than alone. In the light of the fire, they practiced new sounds, shaping words, soft and uncertain, like children learning to sing. A voice called another name, a laugh answered, a rhythm formed. Language was being born, one breath at a time. As the seasons turned, their camps followed rivers and valleys. They learned the taste of different berries, the paths of migrating animals, the signs of approaching rain. Their memories deepened. They taught their children what to eat, where to walk, how to light a spark from stone. Knowledge grew like roots beneath the surface, unseen but spreading. One evening, as the fire burned low, someone looked up and traced shapes among the stars. The great hunter, the sleeping beast, the serpent of light. They saw meaning written across the night sky. For the first time, they connected their stories to the heavens. In that moment, myth was born, and through myth, identity. Time moved differently then, slow and uncounted. Generations passed like waves across sand. The hunters became elders, the children became leaders, and each carried within them the lessons of the earth. They began to bury their dead with care, placing stones and flowers upon their resting places, believing that the spirit continued somewhere unseen. From this belief grew the roots of religion, the thought that life extended beyond what eyes could see. In the faint glow of their fires, humanity had found both fear and faith. Yet all of this remained fragile, fleeting as smoke. Still they wandered, following rivers that shimmered like mirrors beneath the sun. The land was generous and sometimes cruel. Droughts came, storms shattered their shelters, sickness struck. But always they endured, guided by an instinct stronger than despair, the will to live, to adapt, to understand. The first humans may not have known the word civilization, but within their hearts it was already forming. In every tool, in every story, in every shared glance across a firelit night, they built the foundations of what would come. And though they could not see the distant future, the rivers they followed would one day cradle the birth of cities, the rise of kings, and the writing of history itself. The whispers of the dawn had begun, and humanity, though unaware, had already taken its first step toward eternity. The first sunlight of the morning crept gently across the horizon, brushing the earth with a tender glow that promised warmth and life. The people who had wandered the plains for generations now paused to watch the soil beneath their feet, noticing its texture, its moisture, the subtle smell that hinted at fertility hidden within. Slowly, almost unconsciously at first, they began to experiment, scattering seeds found in berries, grasses, and wild plants into small clearings near their camps. At first, it was play, a curiosity born from observation rather than design. They had learned that some seeds would sprout when left alone, sending tiny green shoots toward the sun, fragile and trembling in the wind. Over time, they began to recognize patterns. The seeds of certain plants could be gathered, stored, and replanted in areas that received sunlight, or near rivers that flowed steadily through the land. The people learned to care for these first gardens, tending the young shoots with careful hands, removing weeds that might steal the soil's nourishment, and watching with quiet awe as life emerged from the dark earth. This small act, simple as it seemed, marked the beginning of a profound transformation. No longer entirely dependent on the hunt and the gathering of what nature freely offered, they now understood that food could be coaxed into existence through patience, attention, and intention. This knowledge was precious, like fire itself, and it changed their perception of the world. They began to see the earth not only as a place to move across, but as a partner, something alive and responsive, something that could be guided to yield sustenance. Each day, children followed their elders into these small plots, learning to identify which seeds would grow best, which soil was most fertile, which plants could be eaten raw, and which required cooking or roasting. They discovered that certain seeds were bitter, others sweet, and that some could be stored for long periods, giving security against the uncertainty of weather and the unpredictability of wild herds. With these small experiments, they began to map the land in new ways, noting which rivers flooded and replenished the soil, which hillsides drained quickly, and where shade or sun might favor growth. Slowly, the concept of a fixed location took hold. They no longer needed to roam endlessly in search of food, for they could create food where they settled. These tiny gardens became the first signs of villages, and with villages came routines and schedules that had never existed in the nomadic life. The rising and setting of the sun dictated work hours, and the seasons became a calendar of planting and harvesting. Rituals formed around these activities. Perhaps a seed placed in the ground was accompanied by a whispered word, a hope for rain, a promise to nurture what had been entrusted to their care. The act of sowing became sacred in its own way, linking the people to the cycles of the earth and the sky. Observing these changes, some of the elders began to notice that certain seeds required special treatment. They learned to separate, store, and even rotate the soil to keep it healthy. They watched how water ran through the furrows they dug, how sunlight struck certain patches more than others, and how the plants themselves seemed to bend and lean toward the sun, always seeking light. Each season brought lessons, each failure a cautionary tale. When storms washed away a crop or drought stunted the green shoots, they learned resilience, patience, and adaptability. From these trials, knowledge deepened, and with knowledge came planning. They began to save portions of their harvest for the future, teaching children the value of preparation and foresight. Storage pits and containers emerged, made of clay and woven fibers, protecting seeds and grains from animals, moisture, and rot. This act of preservation was not merely practical, it was revolutionary. It represented foresight, the understanding that today's labor could secure tomorrow's life. Alongside cultivation, the people began to manipulate the environment in subtle ways, clearing brush, guiding streams, and even experimenting with fire to enrich the soil. They discovered that burnt plant matter returned nutrients to the earth, and that controlled fires could prevent wild, destructive blazes while helping certain plants grow more abundantly. Slowly, these acts transformed the land. The wildness of the plains softened into patches of tended greenery, small plots where humans and nature collaborated. This balance was delicate. They were not yet masters of the land, but students learning its rhythm, paying attention to cause and effect, listening to the quiet voice of the earth beneath their feet. Communities grew around these cultivated areas, families and clans settling close together for protection, companionship, and cooperation. Shared work reinforced bonds, and the first sense of social organization beyond immediate kin emerged. People exchanged seeds, knowledge of soil and water, techniques for storage, and stories of successful harvests or failed experiments. Through this sharing, wisdom became communal rather than individual, planting the first seeds not only in the earth, but in the minds of many. Meals began to change as well. Grains could be ground into coarse flour, mixed with water, and cooked over fire to make early forms of bread. Roasted seeds became snacks. Stews emerged from boiled roots and tubers, and fermentation slowly began to transform foods into new flavors. Nutrition improved, health strengthened, and the human body itself adapted to the new diet, laying the foundation for generations to come. In the evenings, children would watch the sky, while elders described how planting and harvesting tied them to the movements of the sun and moon. They learned that the rains were not random, that the seasons followed patterns, and that survival depended on careful observation and timing. From this understanding came early notions of calendars, of measurement, of planning ahead. Life slowed down as a rhythm emerged. Work had purpose. Time became structured, and with structure came the beginnings of culture. Songs were sung as seeds were sown. Chants accompanied the turning of soil, and the lifting of water from streams. The act of working the land was no longer mere survival. It was celebration, a ritual connecting humans to the earth and to each other. With each planted seed, hope was nurtured alongside food. Every sprout represented not only nourishment, but the promise of continuity, of life extending beyond the current moment. The people began to recognize cycles: birth, growth, harvest, decay, and renewal. And with recognition came reverence. They understood, perhaps intuitively, that they were part of something larger, something timeless, and that their careful tending of the earth was a conversation with forces they could not see, but felt deeply. As seasons passed and gardens expanded, these early farmers developed patience, resilience, and a quiet pride. Their lives became intertwined with the land in ways the wandering ancestors could never have imagined. They had planted the first seeds of civilization, and with them, the seeds of knowledge, community, and hope. The whisper of the dawn still lingered, but now it carried a new note: the sound of human hands shaping the future, coaxing life from the soil, and discovering that with care, attention, and imagination, the earth could become home in ways they had never known. The first light of dawn shimmered across the wide expanse of rivers that wound through the land like silver threads, reflecting the sky and drawing the eyes of those who wandered near. For generations, humans had roamed, following herds and the seasonal bounty of the land. Yet there was something irresistible about the river, its steady flow promising water, food, and the quiet hum of life that never rested. Slowly, as their understanding of the land deepened, the people began to linger where the rivers curved, where fish darted beneath the surface, where reeds and fertile soil promised the potential for more than mere survival. They cleared small spaces along the banks, arranging stones to form simple hearths, piling mud and reeds to fashion shelters that could withstand wind and rain, experimenting with the architecture of permanence. Here, near the rivers, life became less a constant flight from hunger and more a rhythm shaped by observation, patience, and labor. Children played in the shallows, learning the patterns of fish and insects, the whisper of currents, and the signs of approaching storms, their laughter mingling with the rush of water over stones. Adults tended gardens and flocks, noticing how the floodwaters enriched the soil, how the changing seasons influenced what could grow and when. From these observations arose planning, schedules, and a sense of time that had never been so tangible. The rivers themselves became teachers. Their currents carried not only water, but ideas, seeds, and stories. Driftwood brought tools or debris from distant lands, and with it, new ways of shaping stone, new techniques of weaving reeds, new methods of constructing shelters. The people exchanged knowledge as freely as they shared food, for survival demanded cooperation, and cooperation required trust. Communities began to form, each family or clan settling close enough to support each other, yet far enough to maintain space and respect. Shared labor brought people together. One person might dig a trench to channel water to crops, another build fences to keep animals from wandering into dangerous areas, while others shaped clay into vessels or dug pits to store food. Together, they discovered efficiency, patterns, and the benefits of planning ahead. The first permanent dwellings rose slowly, humble at first, made of mud, reeds, and stone, but they carried within them the promise of stability. Within these homes, fires burned steadily, not just for warmth or protection, but as the center of social life, where stories were told, knowledge passed from elder to child, and traditions quietly began to form. Life near the river also brought challenges. Floods could wash away carefully tended gardens, storms could scatter supplies, and disease sometimes spread quickly among those living in close quarters. Yet through each trial, the people adapted, learned to build higher platforms, to store food more securely, and to observe the signs of nature with a sharper eye. The riverbanks were rich with food: fish, birds, mollusks, edible plants. But they also became sources of raw materials: Reeds were woven into mats, baskets, and roofing. Mud was shaped into bricks and baked in the sun. Stones were gathered for tools, walls, and simple structures. Each discovery, each improvement, strengthened the bonds of the community and deepened their understanding of the land. As villages grew along the rivers, the people began to recognize the value of collective work. They organized small projects, directing labor to improve irrigation, to construct communal storage pits, and to reinforce shelters against wind and water. These acts of cooperation were subtle beginnings of governance, of social rules that allowed groups larger than a single family to function in harmony. Observing the natural cycles of the rivers, the first lessons of agriculture became more sophisticated. They learned that certain crops thrived when planted after floodwaters receded, that some plants required rotation to maintain soil fertility, and that selective planting could yield more predictable and abundant harvests. Knowledge accumulated, shared orally at first, but with increasing complexity. Some individuals were remembered as particularly wise, their methods and advice passed down through generations. Trade began to emerge as settlements noticed differences in resources. A village with abundant reeds might exchange them for fish or salt from another settlement farther upstream. Knowledge of distant lands traveled along with goods, expanding the horizons of those who had once lived in isolation. Alongside the practical developments, a sense of place and identity formed. People began to name the land, the rivers, the hills, and the stars reflected in the water. Stories grew around landmarks, tying memory to landscape. Rivers were no longer just sources of sustenance. They were lifelines, pathways, and symbols of continuity. The first festivals emerged along these banks, often tied to planting or harvesting, to the ebb and flow of water, or to celestial events observed from the river's edge. Music, song, and dance accompanied these celebrations, marking the passage of time, strengthening community bonds, and turning labor into ritual. With permanence came new roles. Some tended crops, others fished, others crafted tools, and still others became storytellers or keepers of knowledge. Specialization arose naturally from experience and observation, and the seeds of a structured society were sown. The river settlements taught humans the power of observation, the value of foresight, and the meaning of community. Here, life was no longer merely about surviving the next day. It was about planning, nurturing, and dreaming. The patterns of water and earth, the dance of seasons, the subtle shifts of the sky, all these became lessons in order, patience, and cooperation. Slowly, the wilderness around them transformed. Open plains became cultivated gardens, simple shelters became sturdier homes, and scattered families became villages. Paths were worn into the soil, not merely by travel, but by the deliberate movement of people working together. Small walls or ditches protected crops, and communal areas marked the first signs of public space. Children learned the rhythms of planting and harvesting, the sounds of water moving over stones, the changing shapes of clouds, and the constellations that marked the passage of months. They inherited knowledge that was more than survival. It was wisdom, the understanding of cause and effect, the interplay between human effort and natural cycles. Through these riverside settlements, humans discovered stability and permanence for the first time. The flow of water mirrored the flow of life, steady yet ever-changing, offering nourishment, direction, and hope. They realized that by working together and learning from the land, they could not only endure, but thrive. By tending the riverbanks, cultivating the soil, and observing the heavens, they laid the foundations of the first civilizations. Life along the rivers was rich with both toil and discovery, danger and comfort, fear and triumph. And through it all, the people learned patience, resilience, and the quiet joy of shaping their destiny with their own hands. From these simple riverside villages, the story of humanity would ripple outward, flowing like water itself into the vast future, carrying with it the earliest lessons of culture, cooperation, and the enduring bond between humans and the land that sustained them. The riverside settlements had grown, stretching slowly along the banks where the water ran steady and the soil remained fertile. And with growth came new challenges and opportunities. The simple shelters of reeds, wood, and animal skins that had sufficed in earlier times now seemed inadequate against the changing seasons. The wind that howled across open plains, and the rains that could wash away carefully tended gardens. The people began to experiment with materials, observing how mud hardened under the sun, how clay held its shape, and how stones could be stacked to form stable walls. At first, they shaped small lumps of mud and clay, pressing them together with hands moistened in river water, letting the sun bake them into rudimentary bricks. These bricks were irregular, crude, yet each carried the promise of permanence, a declaration that humans could leave something lasting upon the land. Families worked together, mixing soil, water, and plant fibers to strengthen the mud, learning through trial and error which combinations resisted cracking and which succumbed to heat or rain. They discovered that placing bricks in layers with dried reeds between them created walls that could endure storms, and that foundations dug slightly below the surface anchored structures against shifting earth. As their skill grew, the first small homes rose from the ground, simple rectangular shapes with low walls, entrances facing the river, and roofs of reeds or mud thatch. Within these walls, fire could be contained safely, food prepared without constant fear of sparks spreading, and families could sleep with some sense of security. The interiors were modest, yet each space was purposeful. Corners were reserved for sleeping, others for storing tools, grains, or water, and spaces near the hearth became centers of daily life where stories, songs, and knowledge flowed from elder to child. Children watched closely, learning the craft of building, understanding that walls were not mere barriers, but protection, that roofs were not just cover, but a shield from the elements, and that each home represented patience, planning, and care. As homes multiplied along the rivers, small lanes began to form, beaten paths connecting dwellings, guiding movement and organizing space. People noticed that clustering homes together brought advantages. Neighbors could assist during storms, share firewood, or guard each other against predators. Communities became more coherent, more connected, yet each household retained its individuality. Beyond shelter, attention turned to storage. Mud pits and clay vessels were used to protect grains from moisture, insects, and decay. They learned to stack harvested crops carefully, to rotate stores, and to mark the best seeds for planting in the next season. Through these acts of careful preservation, the concept of home expanded beyond the structure itself to encompass safety, provision, and foresight. The construction of homes also gave rise to new tools and techniques. Wooden frames supported walls while mud dried. Simple levers and ropes assisted in lifting heavier stones. Floors were compacted and smoothed to reduce dampness and pests. Every improvement, no matter how small, was shared among the villagers, spreading innovation and creating a subtle sense of collective advancement. Social roles became more defined as well. Some people specialized in shaping mud bricks, others in gathering reeds or stones, while others focused on tending crops or fishing. Knowledge became increasingly valued, and those skilled in building or maintaining structures earned respect and recognition. Observing the world around them, humans began to integrate their surroundings into the design of homes. Houses were built near trees for shade, along slight rises to avoid flooding, and positioned to catch gentle breezes in the heat of summer. Natural resources dictated placement, but imagination allowed adaptation. Walls were thick where wind was strongest, entrances small where safety was needed, and corners reserved for sacred or ritual spaces. Fire remained central, the hearth a symbol of life and continuity. Around it, stories continued to be told, songs sung to mark the seasons, and the rhythm of daily life structured. Homes were more than protection. They were places where memory and identity began to solidify. As villages matured, communal spaces emerged. Open areas between clusters of homes became sites for gatherings, celebrations, or meetings. Some families collaborated to construct larger structures for collective use, perhaps a granary, a communal hearth, or a shelter for the infirm. Cooperation deepened social bonds, teaching lessons that would echo in later civilizations. The very act of building together, lifting mud and stone side by side, created shared pride, trust, and interdependence. Seasonal cycles shaped construction as well. During floods or storms, reinforcement and repair became communal tasks. Roofs were patched, walls strengthened, and drainage improved. These repeated efforts instilled understanding, foresight, and resilience. Children learned not only the craft, but also the rhythm of work, the value of labor, and the satisfaction of seeing a structure endure the tests of time and weather. Beyond practicality, aesthetics began to appear. Patterns were pressed into walls, color added with natural pigments, and shapes adapted for comfort or beauty. Homes became expressions of identity as well as shelter, and the earliest hints of culture, style, and personal choice emerged within the confines of mud and brick. Over years and generations, villages solidified into small settlements, and settlements became landmarks in the landscape, recognizable from distance. The riverbanks teemed with life, not just human, but the plants and animals nurtured or protected by the presence of homes. Paths were worn into the soil, gardens flourished near the walls, and domesticated animals found refuge among the dwellings. The cycle of labor, observation, and adaptation continued, each day reinforcing knowledge and community cohesion. With permanence came new concepts: privacy, ownership, planning, and the first notions of personal and communal space. They realized that a home was not merely a place to sleep, but a place to store the future, a place to learn, to teach, and to gather. Each brick, each wall, and each hearth represented thought, intention, and continuity. Life slowed, yet richness increased. The people learned to observe, to adjust, to anticipate the moods of weather, the behavior of rivers, and the needs of their growing communities. From these humble beginnings, civilizations would rise. The knowledge of mud and brick, of placement and protection, of shared labor and collective vision laid the foundation for the first cities, the earliest laws, and the structures that would house human ambition for generations to come. And though these homes were simple, their creation marked a profound shift. Humanity had moved from wandering through the world to shaping it, from following the rhythms of nature to guiding them, planting the seeds not only of food, but of society, of culture, and of the enduring concept of home. The rivers continued to flow, the sun rose and set, and humans, now anchored in their shelters, began to dream in ways that no wanderer had dreamed before, forging continuity from chaos, permanence from impermanence, and laying the groundwork for the civilizations that would one day stretch across continents, carrying the memory of mud, brick, and hearth into eternity. Along the widening rivers, as villages and settlements multiplied, a quiet rhythm of exchange began to emerge, subtle at first, almost unnoticed, yet destined to shape the course of human society. Items once gathered or produced within a single family were now observed by neighbors, valued not merely for necessity, but for quality, rarity, and usefulness. A basket woven finely from reeds might be traded for a handful of dried fish. A polished stone tool might pass from one hand to another in exchange for seeds that promised a richer harvest. The act of giving and receiving created patterns, a language of negotiation without words, gestures conveying trust, respect, and understanding. Over time, these interactions became more deliberate. Certain families or individuals began to specialize in producing goods that others desired. Some refined their skills in weaving, fashioning mats, baskets, or mats that could hold more, last longer, and resist wear. Others honed their ability to shape stone, creating tools with sharper edges, smoother surfaces, and designs suited for specific tasks. Pottery emerged, vessels carefully formed from clay and baked in the sun or fire. Vessels strong enough to store water, grains, and fermented foods. Each item carried with it not only utility, but pride, a mark of human ingenuity and labor. Trade was no longer mere survival. It became an act of recognition, of skill, and of connection. Movement along the rivers increased as settlements learned that exchange offered more than immediate benefit. One village might possess an abundance of reeds, another of fish, another of salt or rare minerals found in distant hills. By traveling carefully, observing currents and tides, humans discovered that cooperation could multiply wealth, security, and opportunity. Along these routes, informal marketplaces arose. Children observed adults negotiating, mimicking gestures, learning the value of patience, persistence, and persuasion. The oldest members of the community, once focused solely on survival, now became guides, mediators, and record keepers, noting which goods traveled where, which items were scarce, and which trades resulted in mutual benefit. These early networks were fragile, dependent on trust, reputation, and the rhythm of the seasons. Yet they offered a glimpse of what society could achieve when humans connected beyond immediate families or clans. Goods, ideas, and stories all flowed along the same channels, spreading knowledge of distant lands, techniques, and customs. People began to notice that objects held meaning beyond their utility. A finely crafted tool, a patterned basket, or a polished stone could signal skill, status, or intention. Exchange was not only practical, but symbolic, a silent recognition of value, labor, and ingenuity. Trade required honesty, observation, and memory. One had to remember past agreements, anticipate desires, and maintain fairness. Failure to do so threatened both material and social standing. Through this, humans learned principles of fairness, trust, and reciprocity that would later form the backbone of laws and commerce. Alongside material exchange, cultural exchange flourished. Songs, stories, and techniques passed from one village to another, adapting to new environments and needs. Tales of hunts, of floods, of the stars seen from distant hills, enriched communal knowledge, weaving imagination with practical survival. Trade routes, whether along rivers or across valleys, became veins of communication. They allowed humans to glimpse landscapes beyond their immediate surroundings, to anticipate changes in climate, to discover new plants and animals, and to share solutions to common problems. Even in moments of risk, the promise of connection drew people forward, teaching courage, observation, and adaptability. Markets also inspired early forms of social organization. Some settlements appointed individuals to oversee exchanges, maintain fairness, or mediate disputes. Patterns of negotiation became codified in practice, if not yet in writing. The very act of giving and receiving strengthened bonds, creating networks of mutual dependence that extended beyond family or kinship. Currency had not yet emerged, yet value was measured in need, scarcity, and utility. Trade demanded awareness of quantity, quality, and timing. To give too little risked offense, to take too much risked retaliation. Through these subtleties, humans developed a deeper sense of ethics, strategy, and community. Goods themselves carried stories. A polished stone from distant hills spoke of travel and exploration. A rare seed conveyed knowledge of climate, soil, and fertility. Each item became a tangible lesson, a fragment of distant experience shared and preserved. Children watched, imitating gestures, learning the subtle signals of negotiation, the cadence of asking, the patience of waiting, and the satisfaction of a successful exchange. Through repetition, these lessons became instinct, embedding trade and cooperation into human behavior. Over generations, trade allowed settlements to thrive where isolated villages might have struggled. Surpluses created security, exchange created opportunity. People could specialize, innovate, and take risks, knowing that the network of connections offered support. Along the rivers, small docks and platforms appeared, simple yet effective, facilitating the movement of goods from canoes, rafts, or simple boats. Paths led from rivers to villages, gardens, and forests, connecting resources to communities and communities to each other. Trade also brought challenges as jealousy, scarcity, or miscommunication could ignite tension. The people learned conflict resolution, negotiation, and compromise, shaping social structures that reinforced cohesion and minimized harm. Rituals sometimes accompanied exchange, acknowledging the contribution of nature, the skill of the producer, and the generosity of the giver. Songs marked arrivals and departures, and gatherings celebrated mutual benefit and shared effort. Through these rituals, trade became more than commerce. It was a rhythm of social life, reinforcing relationships, cultural continuity, and communal identity. As knowledge spread along these networks, innovations multiplied. Techniques for building, weaving, farming, and crafting traveled with goods, adapting to local conditions and improving over time. Exchange became a conduit for collective wisdom, a living archive transmitted orally through generations. The act of trade also taught observation of seasons, of supply and demand, and of human behavior. Traders learned to anticipate needs, to notice scarcity before it became crisis, and to prepare for fluctuations in production or environment. These insights were critical for survival, for they allowed communities to plan, stockpile, and protect their resources. The first agreements, though informal, embodied principles that would guide future societies: fairness, trust, patience, and respect for labor. Human interaction through trade nurtured empathy, negotiation, and foresight. By moving goods, humans moved ideas, skills, and traditions, weaving a web of interdependence that strengthened the foundation of civilization itself. Rivers, paths, and marketplaces became arteries of progress, carrying sustenance and knowledge alike. Alongside survival, trade nurtured imagination, aspiration, and a sense of possibility. Communities connected through exchange began to see themselves as part of something larger, a growing network of human ingenuity and effort stretching across lands and generations. Through barter, humans discovered cooperation, responsibility, and the joy of creating value that could be shared. The rivers continued to flow. Winds whispered through the reeds, and settlements along their banks thrived not only through food and shelter, but through the beating heart of trade, which pulsed quietly yet steadily, laying the invisible threads that would one day bind villages into cities, cultures into kingdoms, and humanity into the complex civilizations that stretch across time and space. Trade, humble and unassuming, had become the lifeblood of progress, teaching lessons in connection, trust, and foresight that no other human endeavor had yet achieved. And as people exchanged goods, they exchanged stories, knowledge, and hope, shaping the invisible foundations of society, preparing the world for the remarkable tapestry of civilization yet to unfold. As riverside villages expanded, homes multiplied along the banks, and trade routes intertwined settlements, a subtle but profound shift began to take root. Humans discovered the power of community. Families that once focused solely on their own survival now found strength and security in cooperation, realizing that shared effort could achieve far more than solitary labor. Each household contributed its skills, knowledge, and labor, from tending crops to shaping clay, weaving reeds, or catching fish. The act of collaboration, once casual and informal, became intentional, guided by the understanding that the well-being of one depended on the well-being of all. Children observed the rhythms of communal life, learning that patience, fairness, and empathy were essential to harmony. They saw that some members specialized in particular crafts, that certain individuals held knowledge of planting cycles, irrigation, or medicinal herbs, and that the flow of information and labor created efficiency and resilience. Social roles, though fluid, began to crystallize, forming the first rudimentary hierarchies based not on dominance, but on skill, wisdom, and trust. Elders held positions of guidance, mediating disputes, teaching survival and cultivation techniques, and passing down oral histories that knit the community together. Stories of the land, the rivers, the skies, and the animals became shared memory, creating a sense of identity and belonging that transcended immediate family ties. Rituals and shared celebrations emerged naturally, marking planting and harvesting seasons, the arrival of floodwaters, the first sprouts, or the full moon's reflection on the river. Songs were sung as work progressed. Chants synchronized the turning of soil or the hauling of water, and rhythmic tasks fostered unity and cooperation. These shared activities strengthened bonds, reinforced roles, and cultivated a sense of purpose, giving each individual a stake in the collective success of the village. As settlements stabilized, communication improved. Paths were maintained, meeting spaces organized, and signals devised to convey warnings of danger or the approach of visitors. With this increased connectivity, disputes over resources or land were managed with negotiation rather than violence, fostering social cohesion and shared norms. Communities began to plan collectively, observing seasonal cycles, predicting harvests, and coordinating labor to maximize productivity. Knowledge became communal, recorded in memory and passed down through generations, establishing continuity, stability, and resilience. Beyond work and survival, social interaction nourished creativity and innovation. Humans learned from each other, experimented together, and adapted methods based on collective experience. A particularly successful irrigation system, a new technique for preserving grains, or a more effective method of crafting tools would be shared, creating a ripple effect of improvement across the settlement. The presence of many people in close proximity also enabled care, protection, and mutual support. When floods threatened crops or storms damaged homes, neighbors worked side by side to repair damage, save provisions, or rescue vulnerable members. Illness, injury, or old age, once isolating and dangerous, could now be mitigated through shared attention and resources. Food was stored communally in some cases, distributed according to need, and surplus carefully managed to prevent scarcity. This practice not only enhanced survival but reinforced ethical values and trust, teaching that generosity and prudence were essential to the community's long-term success. Language and storytelling flourished within these communities. Oral traditions captured history, explained natural phenomena, and offered guidance for future generations. Tales of heroic hunts, the cunning of animals, and lessons learned from environmental challenges were recounted around the hearth, reinforcing shared knowledge, cultural values, and social cohesion. Community spaces emerged naturally. Open areas between clusters of homes became centers for gathering, ritual, trade, and education. These spaces were the heart of the settlement, where skills were taught, songs sung, disputes resolved, and collective decisions made. The act of coming together, whether to plant, harvest, trade, or celebrate, reinforced identity and belonging. Children learned the rhythms of communal life through observation and participation. They mimicked elders in tending gardens, crafting tools, or maintaining shelters, internalizing not only practical skills, but also values, traditions, and social norms. Play became a subtle form of education, teaching cooperation, competition, fairness, and empathy. Through repetition and observation, they absorbed the intricate web of social roles and responsibilities, preparing for adulthood within a structured yet flexible community. Religion or spiritual belief may have begun to emerge alongside these social structures. Natural phenomena such as the river's ebb and flow, the cycles of the moon, the rising and setting of the sun, and the changing of seasons likely inspired awe, reflection, and rituals. While details are lost to time, it is plausible that communal ceremonies, offerings, or songs honored the forces that sustained life, reinforcing shared identity, respect for the environment, and moral guidance. The rise of community also stimulated the specialization of labor. Certain individuals focused solely on crafting tools, tending flocks, weaving textiles, or preparing food, while others devoted time to observing weather patterns, maintaining irrigation, or guiding construction projects. This division of labor increased efficiency, nurtured skill development, and reinforced interdependence, laying the groundwork for future economic and social complexity. Social cohesion fostered innovation. When multiple minds collaborated, solutions to challenges, whether agricultural, architectural, or logistical, emerged more quickly and effectively than any individual effort could achieve alone. Patterns of experimentation, observation, and refinement became embedded in daily life, transmitted through example, teaching, and shared experience. Over time, informal rules and agreements took hold, establishing norms for trade, conflict resolution, labor division, and communal decision-making. Trust became the invisible glue that held these early communities together. Reputation mattered, fairness was rewarded, and breaches of trust had consequences not just for the individual, but for the entire group. These social mechanisms reinforced stability, encouraged cooperation, and nurtured the growth of more complex societal structures. Life within the community also fostered emotional bonds, empathy, and mutual responsibility. Celebrations, rituals, and shared labor created opportunities for individuals to connect, support each other, and experience joy collectively. Relationships flourished, and intergenerational ties strengthened as elders guided youth, teaching knowledge, tradition, and values. The rise of community transformed human perception of time, effort, and consequence. People began to anticipate future needs, plan collectively, and recognize that their actions influenced not only immediate outcomes, but the welfare of generations to come. These early lessons in foresight, cooperation, and shared responsibility became cornerstones of civilization itself. Through the careful cultivation of social bonds, shared labor, knowledge transmission, and mutual support, humans discovered the profound strength of community. The villages along the rivers were no longer merely clusters of homes. They had become living networks of connection, culture, and purpose. Here, humans learned that survival and prosperity depended not only on the earth, the river, or the sky, but also on each other. Cooperation, trust, and shared vision became as essential as food and water, and the invisible threads of social cohesion wove the first fabric of civilization. As sunlight glinted off the river, reflecting the rhythm of daily life, the people of these communities felt the quiet power of unity. Through collective effort, observation, and care, they transformed their surroundings, nurtured knowledge, and established bonds that would endure across generations. The rise of community marked a turning point in human history, a moment when individuals discovered that together they could create stability, purpose, and culture, setting the stage for the flourishing of town-cities and the complex societies that would follow, all built upon the simple, profound, and enduring principle that humans are stronger, wiser, and more resilient when they stand together, bound by trust, shared labor, and the heartbeat of communal life. As communities along the rivers solidified and settlements expanded, humans discovered that survival and prosperity depended not only on physical labor and cooperation, but also on the ability to communicate complex ideas, intentions, and experiences. Words, once simple sounds uttered in the heat of a hunt or the call for help, began to acquire structure, meaning, and subtlety, becoming the first tools for abstract thought. Language emerged as a living organism, evolving organically with the needs of the people. Gestures accompanied sounds, adding nuance, emotion, and clarity. Over time, patterns formed. Repeated sounds became associated with objects, actions, or concepts. Children learned these patterns as naturally as they learned to walk, absorbing not only vocabulary, but tone, rhythm, and the unspoken rules that guided conversation. Elders, often the most experienced and respected members of the community, became the guardians of language, refining it, teaching it, and using it to preserve knowledge. Stories, once fleeting and immediate, could now be recalled and shared with precision, carrying lessons from one generation to the next. These oral traditions formed the foundation of memory, culture, and education. As humans observed the patterns of nature, the cycles of seasons, the behavior of animals, and the changing courses of rivers, they began to record these observations using symbols. Simple marks in the soil, impressions on clay, scratches on bark, or carved lines in stone became representations of ideas, objects, or events. Each symbol was an attempt to capture the intangible, to make the fleeting permanent, to transform experience into knowledge. With each mark, humans discovered that meaning could transcend time and space, that understanding could be preserved beyond immediate memory, and that communication could bridge the gap between generations. Counting, measurement, and calculation emerged alongside symbolic representation. Humans noticed patterns in planting, harvesting, trade, and celestial observation. They began to mark quantities, track days, and anticipate cycles. The early mathematics of symbols became indispensable, allowing planning, coordination, and prediction, which in turn reinforced the security and prosperity of the community. Knowledge, once tacit and localized, became portable and shareable. Elders taught the young not only how to craft tools, build homes, and cultivate food, but also how to read the world, understand patterns, and interpret symbols. Skills were transmitted systematically, lessons reinforced through repetition, observation, and guided practice. Art, too, intertwined with language and symbols. Cave walls, clay tablets, and woven textiles bore images that conveyed stories, beliefs, and identity. These visual symbols complemented spoken language, creating a richer, more nuanced means of expression. Hunting scenes, ceremonial depictions, or representations of daily life encoded not only information but emotion, intention, and communal memory. Memory, oral or visual, became the repository of experience. Elders recalled past events, disasters, triumphs, and solutions, embedding them within stories, songs, and symbols. Each retelling reinforced knowledge, taught social norms, and preserved practical wisdom. Children and adults alike internalized these lessons, preparing themselves for the challenges and responsibilities of communal life. Trade and social interaction accelerated the evolution of language and symbols. As goods, ideas, and techniques traveled between villages, so did words, gestures, and representations. Linguistic patterns adapted to new contexts, absorbing and reflecting regional variations, innovations, and influences. Vocabulary expanded, metaphors emerged, and abstract concepts became communicable. The ability to describe distant lands, predict weather, or coordinate labor fostered not only efficiency, but imagination, foresight, and strategy. Symbols also became codified for practical purposes. Tokens represented quantities in trade, marks denoted ownership, and sequences recorded events. This early record-keeping allowed humans to manage resources more effectively, anticipate scarcity, and plan collectively. Each mark was a tangible manifestation of thought, a bridge between mind and world, enabling communities to organize complex activities across time and space. Language and symbols together transformed thought itself. Abstract ideas, once ephemeral, became expressible and shareable. Humans could discuss plans, hypothesize outcomes, teach morality, and preserve cultural memory. Conversation, debate, and storytelling nurtured critical thinking, empathy, and foresight, embedding knowledge not just in objects or events but in social practice. Curiosity flourished alongside communication. Humans asked questions about the heavens, the behavior of animals, the flow of rivers, and the cycles of crops. Symbols and words became tools to capture patterns, test ideas, and transmit conclusions. Observation became systematic, analysis deliberate, and experimentation iterative, all supported by the ability to record and recall. Early communities began to specialize knowledge. Some focused on agriculture, others on toolmaking, animal husbandry, or medicinal plants. Knowledge of celestial patterns guided planting and navigation. Craft techniques improved through iterative sharing and refinement. Those with particular skill or insight gained respect, creating the first forms of social recognition based on intellect and experience. Ritual and religion intertwined with language and symbols. Songs, prayers, and ceremonial gestures encoded cosmology, moral guidance, and communal identity. Symbols conveyed sacred meaning, offering continuity, structure, and a sense of belonging. Storytelling, enriched with symbolic representation, preserved these values, instructing young and guiding adults. Education became intentional. Apprenticeships, mentorships, and observation were complemented by demonstration, storytelling, and symbolic instruction. Knowledge moved beyond practical survival into the realm of culture, ethics, and reflection. The community developed collective memory, a shared understanding that anchored social cohesion and continuity. Written marks were rare and simple at first, yet their emergence signaled the dawn of civilization. They allowed humans to transcend the limitations of immediate memory, to record agreements, track resources, and preserve wisdom. Each symbol, each word, each story carried weight and responsibility, linking past, present, and future in a continuous thread of learning. Trade, travel, and social interaction multiplied the impact of language and symbols. Messages, concepts, and innovations could leap from one village to another, accelerating cultural and technological development. As knowledge spread, humans learned not only to survive, but to understand, interpret, and shape their environment deliberately. This interplay between language, symbols, and knowledge laid the foundation for governance, art, education, and science. Communities no longer relied solely on instinct, trial, or memory. They could plan, coordinate, and imagine collectively. Ideas became as vital as food or water, nourishing the mind, guiding behavior, and connecting generations. The rivers, paths, and villages now carried not only people and goods, but words, stories, and symbols, flowing invisibly through the fabric of society. Knowledge became the lifeblood of civilization, a resource that grew when shared and endured when recorded. Children, observing, listening, and imitating, became participants in a growing intellectual legacy. They internalized language, mastered symbols, and contributed to the evolving repository of understanding. The power of communication, both spoken and visual, allowed humans to expand horizons, coordinate complex projects, navigate uncertainty, and envision futures beyond immediate needs. Through these early forms of language, symbolism, and record-keeping, humans discovered the profound capacity to think abstractly, to plan collectively, and to preserve the wisdom of generations. Civilization, fragile yet resilient, began not only in shelter, labor, and trade, but in the shared human commitment to knowledge, memory, and expression. With each word spoken, each symbol inscribed, and each lesson transmitted, humans wove an intricate tapestry of understanding, cooperation, and imagination, creating the invisible yet unbreakable threads that would support societies, cities, and cultures for millennia to come. Carrying the story of our species beyond survival and into the realm of thought, identity, and enduring legacy. In the quiet rhythm of riverside life, humans discovered that their hands, clever and observant, could shape the world in ways that the body alone could not sustain. The first tools, simple yet transformative, became extensions of intention, imagination, and necessity. Stones chipped to create cutting edges allowed the preparation of food with greater efficiency, the crafting of hides with precision, and the shaping of wood into practical forms. Wooden levers and stakes multiplied human strength, enabling the movement of heavy objects, the construction of shelters, and the cultivation of soil on scales previously impossible. Axes, adzes, and digging sticks emerged, each refined through experience, observation, and experimentation, the edges sharpened by friction, fire, and patience. These implements not only eased labor, but expanded possibilities, opening new ways of hunting, farming, building, and crafting. Children observed and imitated, learning through repetition, trial, and guidance, internalizing the rhythm of work and the logic of design. Each innovation, no matter how small, was tested, refined, and preserved in collective memory, becoming part of the communal toolkit. Humans noticed that combining materials produced stronger, more versatile tools. Stone bound to wood with plant fibers, hardened by fire, created cutting implements capable of slicing meat, shaping timber, or engraving clay. Bone, horn, and antler provided flexibility and resilience, forming needles, awls, or fishhooks that expanded dietary and creative possibilities. Knowledge of these methods was treasured and transmitted carefully, often through demonstration, apprenticeship, and storytelling, ensuring that each generation built upon the ingenuity of the last. The impact of tools extended beyond physical labor. With improved implements, humans could process food more efficiently, store surplus, and plan for scarcity. They could clear land for planting, dig irrigation channels, and construct shelters that endured seasons and storms. Tools became instruments of foresight, allowing humans to anticipate challenges, mitigate risks, and manipulate their environment to suit communal needs. Artisans emerged, individuals who dedicated themselves to mastering particular crafts. Their expertise elevated the quality, durability, and aesthetic of tools, creating objects that were not only functional, but elegant. A finely shaped blade, a meticulously carved handle, or a balanced spear exemplified skill, ingenuity, and care. The presence of skilled artisans encouraged innovation, teaching others the principles of design, balance, and material selection. Communities began to organize around these capabilities. Workshops and workspaces appeared within settlements, areas where crafting, repairing, and experimenting could occur without disrupting daily life. Apprentices learned under the watchful eyes of elders, observing subtleties, asking questions, and practicing until competence was achieved. The transmission of skill became structured, embedding techniques, safety, and creativity into daily practice. The cumulative effect of tools on social and economic life was profound. As implements improved, productivity increased. Surplus food supported larger populations, enabling the growth of settlements into more complex communities. Architectural projects expanded in scale and ambition, from simple homes to communal structures, granaries, and defensive works. Trade flourished, as improved tools produced more desirable goods, from finely shaped stone implements to woven mats, pottery, and polished ornaments. Even leisure and ritual benefited. Carving, engraving, and decorative work expressed creativity, identity, and belief. Ceremonial objects, adorned with intricate patterns or symbolic motifs, reflected both skill and communal values, linking practical labor with cultural expression. Observation guided innovation. Humans noticed which materials endured, which shapes facilitated tasks, and which techniques minimized effort or maximized effect. Fire played a central role, not only in cooking and warmth, but in hardening stone, shaping clay, and tempering wooden tools. Experimentation became embedded in daily life, fostering curiosity, problem-solving, and iterative learning. Communication amplified the impact of tools. Knowledge of superior methods, better materials, or innovative designs traveled along trade routes, spreading ideas and skills across villages and settlements. Apprenticeships, demonstrations, and oral instruction ensured that expertise was not lost, but enriched with each iteration. The landscape itself was transformed by tools. Forests were cleared for agriculture, rivers managed for irrigation, and soils tilled with increasing sophistication. The environment, once navigated passively, now responded to human intervention. Settlements could expand, resources be managed strategically, and survival secured against unpredictability. Tools also shape perception, extending the senses and capacities of humans. Spears allowed hunting at a distance, axes transformed timber into shelters, and pottery preserved water, grains, and foodstuffs. Humans learned to anticipate the potential of each object, to imagine applications, and to refine techniques to achieve desired outcomes. Education intertwined with technology. Children learn not only to use tools, but to understand the principles behind them. Leverage, balance, sharpness, durability, and adaptability. Observing the elders, experimenting carefully, and reflecting on successes and failures They internalized a philosophy of practical knowledge, curiosity, and continuous improvement. Specialization deepened. Some became hunters, others artisans, builders or farmers, each role defined by skill, observation, and contribution to communal welfare. Collaboration between specialists produced innovations beyond the capacity of individuals alone. New methods for constructing homes, crafting clothing, or preparing food arose from the shared insights of many minds. Tools, in essence, became a language expressing intention, creativity, and problem-solving in tangible form. Through them, humans could manipulate their world, communicate ideas, and preserve knowledge. Each improvement represented a step in collective progress, a bridge between imagination and reality, between individual effort and communal benefit. The impact of tools on culture was profound. Objects carried meaning, status, and identity. Ornamentation signified craftsmanship, purpose, or spiritual significance. Tools were not merely functional, they were extensions of thought, creativity, and social structure. Social organization adapted to technological development. Planning, coordination, and cooperation were necessary to produce, maintain, and distribute tools. Communities learned the value of foresight, resource management, and collective problem-solving. Conflict was minimized through the shared understanding that mutual benefit relied on the careful use of implements and the equitable distribution of resources. Innovation fostered aspiration. Humans imagined what could be achieved, then attempted, tested, and refined. Experimentation became natural, embedded in daily life, and recorded through symbols, stories, and demonstration. Knowledge of successful methods spread, reinforcing both practical skill and social cohesion. The rivers, forests, and fields witnessed the subtle yet profound influence of tools on human life. Paths were cleared, shelters constructed, harvests gathered, and surplus stored with care and efficiency. Communities thrived, not only through labor, but through ingenuity, observation, and shared skill. Tools had transformed humans from passive observers to active shapers of their environment, capable of envisioning, planning, and realizing outcomes that sustained survival, fostered culture, and anchored civilization. As the sun rose and set over settlements, fires burned within homes and workshops, and the rhythmic activity of shaping, crafting, and refining tools continued day after day. Children listened to the hum of industry, observed the skillful hands of elders, and learned the interplay of necessity, imagination, and technique. Each tool represented knowledge, each action extended intention, and each collaborative effort strengthened both community and individual capacity. Through these simple yet profound instruments, humans discovered a new dimension of control, creativity, and continuity. Tools became vessels of experience, memory, and progress, carrying the wisdom of generations into the future and preparing humanity for ever more complex challenges, ambitious structures, and the unfolding story of civilization itself, ensuring that the legacy of labor, observation, and ingenuity would endure, guiding the journey from survival to mastery, from simple shelters to sprawling communities, and from scattered knowledge to collective achievement. As villages grew along the fertile banks of rivers and settlements expanded across valleys, humans faced challenges that could no longer be solved by individual effort or spontaneous cooperation alone. The complexity of communal life, increasing population, shared resources, and trade demanded new forms of organization, a system to maintain harmony, ensure fairness, and manage collective endeavors. From these needs arose the first inklings of governance, not as formal institutions, but as shared understandings, informal agreements, and respected leadership that balanced authority with responsibility. Elders and skilled individuals assumed roles beyond their personal expertise, mediating disputes, allocating resources, and guiding collective decisions. Their authority rested not on coercion, but on experience, wisdom, and the trust of the community. These early leaders observed the interactions of neighbors, the needs of families, and the potential for conflict, ensuring that decisions benefited not only individuals, but the settlement as a whole. Rituals, ceremonies, and social norms reinforced their guidance, creating continuity, predictability, and a sense of justice. Humans recognized the necessity of rules, subtle yet consistent principles that regulated behavior, minimized conflict, and safeguarded the welfare of the group. These rules, though unwritten, were observed carefully, transmitted through oral instruction, demonstration, and the subtle reinforcement of social expectations. For instance, access to communal resources, hunting grounds, or water sources required coordination, compromise, and respect. Transgressions were met with mediation, restitution, or social censure, all aimed at preserving cohesion rather than punishment alone. Governance, in its embryonic form, intertwined with the growth of trust, reciprocity, and social memory. People remembered past agreements, observed patterns of fairness, and relied on reputation to maintain stability. Elders and leaders acted as custodians of this social knowledge, guiding behavior, interpreting tradition, and ensuring that collective memory informed daily decision-making. As settlements expanded, specialized roles emerged, creating a division of responsibility that eased coordination. Some individuals oversaw the distribution of food and water, others managed trade, labor, or construction projects, while skilled negotiators mediated disputes. Leadership was dynamic, responsive, and deeply intertwined with communal participation, ensuring that authority was recognized, respected, and accountable. The presence of governance allowed humans to plan collectively. Harvests were scheduled, surplus managed, and labor allocated efficiently. Projects that demanded cooperation, such as constructing shelters, digging irrigation channels, or fortifying villages, became feasible. Individuals understood their contributions, their responsibilities, and the collective benefit of coordinated effort. Governance also guided ethical behavior, embedding principles of fairness, reciprocity, and restraint into daily life. Elders emphasized the value of honesty, the consequences of greed, and the importance of shared responsibility. Stories, rituals, and ceremonies reinforced these lessons, providing context, meaning, and continuity for all members of the community. Early conflict resolution relied on dialogue, negotiation, and mediation. Disputes over land, resources, or personal disagreements were addressed through counsel, compromise, and restitution. These practices laid the groundwork for social stability, ensuring that the community could thrive despite inevitable differences and tensions. Leaders, although respected, were not rulers in the modern sense. Their authority was derived from the consent of the governed, from demonstrated wisdom, skill, and fairness. They guided rather than imposed, advised rather than commanded, and relied on persuasion, example, and reputation to influence decisions. The growth of settlements and the emergence of governance enabled the development of collective memory, record-keeping, and planning. Leaders and elders preserved knowledge of seasonal cycles, resource distribution, trade agreements, and communal rules. This knowledge was transmitted orally, embedded in stories, rituals, and daily practice, ensuring that lessons from the past informed future action. Governance also fostered social cohesion, creating identity, belonging, and shared purpose. Individuals understood themselves as members of a larger group, invested in its welfare and survival. Rituals, festivals, and communal gatherings reinforced solidarity, celebrated cooperation, and nurtured the bonds that held society together. As settlements became more complex, governance adapted to new challenges. Population growth, trade networks, environmental pressures, and external threats demanded flexibility, foresight, and the ability to coordinate multiple activities simultaneously. Leaders learned to balance competing needs, prioritize resources, and negotiate with neighboring settlements, laying the foundation for diplomacy and regional coordination. The rise of governance encouraged the specialization of knowledge and labor. Individuals devoted themselves to particular crafts, trade, or advisory roles, supported by a system that recognized their contributions and facilitated collaboration. This structure increased efficiency, enhanced skill development, and strengthened communal resilience. Observation, negotiation, and foresight became essential qualities for leaders. The ability to anticipate resource shortages, plan for seasonal changes, and resolve conflicts before they escalated proved critical to the survival and prosperity of the community. Leadership became a practice of responsibility, judgment, and ethical conduct, teaching future generations the principles of fair authority and collective decision-making. Early governance was also intimately connected with spirituality, ritual, and moral guidance. Ceremonies reinforced the authority of leaders, codified social norms, and provided a framework for interpreting natural phenomena, environmental changes, and communal responsibilities. These intertwined spheres of influence, practical and symbolic, ensured stability, continuity, and cohesion. Governance created a scaffold for growth. Communities could now coordinate agriculture, manage trade, construct shelters, and organize defense. Individuals could specialize, innovate, and plan collectively, confident that communal structures would support both effort and need. The invisible threads of rules, leadership, and trust held villages together, enabling the expansion of knowledge, skill, and social complexity. Through governance, humans discovered the value of structure, foresight, and accountability. They learned that cooperation required organization, that fairness fostered stability, and that leadership demanded wisdom, empathy, and ethical judgment. Communities became not only collections of individuals, but interdependent networks, capable of sustained survival, shared progress, and collective aspiration. Over time, governance shaped perception, behavior, and identity. People internalized norms, respected authority based on merit and trust, and understood their role within the larger social fabric. Decisions were influenced by precedent, observation, and the anticipated consequences of action, embedding foresight and responsibility into daily life. As settlements thrived under these emerging systems, governance enabled more ambitious projects. Irrigation networks, communal buildings, defensive structures, and cultural ceremonies became possible, all coordinated through shared rules, communication, and leadership. The ability to plan, organize, and enforce agreements multiplied human capability, allowing not only survival, but growth, creativity, and cultural development. The birth of governance was the quiet revolution that transformed scattered villages into cohesive communities. It provided structure without rigidity, guidance without oppression, and accountability without fear. Through informal rules, respected leadership, and collective memory, humans discovered the capacity to manage complexity, resolve conflict, and plan for the future. Rivers, fields, and villages thrived under this emerging order, as people learned that the welfare of each depended on the welfare of all, and that trust, fairness, and wisdom were as essential as food, water, or shelter. Governance, humble in its beginnings, laid the invisible framework upon which civilization would flourish, enabling humans to coordinate effort, cultivate knowledge, and build societies capable of enduring across generations. And as elders guided the young, transmitted lessons of fairness, observation, and responsibility, the seeds of cities, law, and organized culture were quietly sown along the banks of rivers, the paths between settlements, and in the hearts of the people, who learned that together they could shape not only their immediate survival, but the enduring course of human history itself. As humans settled along rivers, valleys, and fertile plains, the rhythms of nature became both a guide and a mystery. The cycles of the sun and moon, the ebb and flow of rivers, the growth and decay of plants, and the behavior of animals inspired awe, curiosity, and reflection. Early humans sought to understand these forces, to predict their patterns, and to find meaning in events beyond their immediate control. In this quest arose the first inklings of religion and spiritual belief. subtle yet profound systems that sought to connect humans with the unseen forces that shape their world. Observing the sky, humans noticed the regularity of celestial cycles, the rise and fall of constellations, the changing phases of the moon, and the warmth of the sun that nurtured life. These observations were imbued with significance, forming the foundation of early cosmology. Natural phenomena were often personified or deified, attributed to spirits, forces, or entities that governed the environment. Storms, floods, droughts, and bountiful harvests were interpreted as expressions of these forces' favor or displeasure. Humans sought to influence these forces, to invite their protection, and to avert disaster through ritual, offering, and observance. Sacred spaces began to emerge within settlements. Certain groves, riverbanks, caves, or elevated sites were chosen for reflection, ceremony, or observation. These locations, perceived as powerful or spiritually resonant, became focal points for gatherings, communal rituals, and instruction. Humans recognized the distinction between ordinary activity and the sacred, embedding reverence, rhythm, and symbolism into communal life. Ritual practices developed naturally from necessity, observation, and shared experience. Offerings of food, crafted objects, or symbolic gestures became means of expressing gratitude, seeking guidance, or invoking protection. Songs, chants, and dance accompanied these acts, creating rhythm and memory that reinforced communal bonds and ethical understanding. Elders, possessing accumulated experience and insight, often became the custodians of these practices. They interpreted signs, instructed youth, led ceremonies, and maintained the coherence of belief systems. Their role, combining authority, knowledge, and spiritual guidance, was critical to the cohesion and moral order of early communities. Storytelling intertwined with ritual and belief. Myths, parables, and allegories conveyed not only spiritual concepts, but also ethical guidance, historical memory, and practical wisdom. Tales of creation, the behavior of gods or spirits, heroic ancestors, and the consequences of moral action provided both education and inspiration. These narratives preserved communal knowledge, encoded survival strategies, and nurtured imagination. Symbolism became a bridge between tangible experience and abstract meaning. Rocks, clay, wood, and woven materials were inscribed, carved, or arranged to represent concepts, entities, or cosmic forces. These symbols conveyed ideas that could not be expressed solely through words, reinforcing memory, teaching, and spiritual reflection. Belief fostered shared values and social cohesion. Through communal ceremonies, individuals learned the importance of cooperation, fairness, reciprocity, and respect for life and environment. Spiritual frameworks provided guidelines for conduct, encouraged care for the young and elderly, and emphasized the interdependence of humans, animals, and the natural world. Observation of nature informed ritual and belief. Humans noted the cycles of planting and harvesting, the behavior of animals, and seasonal shifts, linking them to deities, spirits, or cosmic order. Knowledge of these patterns became encoded in ritual calendars, ceremonial acts, and communal instruction, merging practicality with spirituality. Early religion also addressed existential questions: birth, death, the passage of time, and the unknown beyond life. Through symbolic acts, storytelling, and communal reflection, humans began to explore concepts of mortality, legacy, and continuity, creating the first foundations of ethics, memory, and moral responsibility. Community and belief were inseparable. Rituals, ceremonies, and shared stories reinforced cohesion, identity, and purpose. Participation in sacred acts strengthened bonds between individuals, families, and settlements, instilling a sense of belonging, trust, and shared destiny. Art emerged as a vehicle of expression and devotion. Paintings, carvings, sculptures, and decorative objects embodied spiritual concepts, commemorated events, or honored ancestors and natural forces. Artistic creation, embedded in ritual, cultivated attention, skill, imagination, and reverence. Knowledge of spiritual practice was transmitted intentionally and informally. Children observed ceremonies, imitated gestures, listened to elders, and participated in songs and dances. They internalized ethical values, social norms, and spiritual concepts, integrating them seamlessly into daily life. This early education ensured continuity, stability, and cultural identity. The relationship between humans and nature became moral as well as practical. Rivers, forests, animals, and celestial patterns were treated with respect and caution, recognized as sources of sustenance, power, and spiritual significance. Ethical codes, emerging from observation and ritual, guided hunting, gathering, cultivation, and communal sharing, embedding stewardship into social life. Conflict, too, was mitigated through spiritual frameworks. Transgressions against individuals, property, or the environment were often understood in moral or spiritual terms, invoking restitution, ritual, or community judgment. Belief systems reinforced ethical conduct, social cohesion, and the integration of practical wisdom with moral reflection. As settlements became more complex, the intertwining of spiritual practice with social organization strengthened governance, education, and cultural continuity. Elders, leaders, and spiritual guides collaborated, ensuring that laws, rituals, and ethical principles were coherent and supported communal stability. Festivals and ceremonies marked cycles of planting, harvest, celestial events, and life stages, structuring communal time and reinforcing shared values. Early religion inspired imagination, inquiry, and explanation. Humans pondered the causes of natural events, experimented with tools and methods, and encoded insights within stories, symbols, and ritual. Spiritual reflection encouraged observation, innovation, and ethical consideration, linking cognitive, emotional, and social growth. Knowledge, belief, and practice became inseparable. Understanding the environment, predicting cycles, and managing resources were intertwined with moral, ethical, and spiritual insight. Communities that integrated these dimensions were better equipped to survive, thrive, and maintain cohesion across generations. The sacred and the practical merged seamlessly. Planting, hunting, crafting, and constructing were accompanied by song, prayer, or ritual, reinforcing intention, skill, and communal participation. The rhythm of daily life echoed with reverence, reflection, and meaning. Humans discovered that spirituality could inspire care, cooperation, and foresight, strengthening both individual character and communal resilience. Over generations, rituals became codified, symbols standardized, and oral traditions elaborated. Knowledge accumulated, refined, and transmitted, embedding continuity, ethics, and cultural identity into the very fabric of life. Ceremonies, stories, and symbols served as repositories of memory, wisdom, and moral guidance. Early religion nurtured curiosity and imagination. Humans pondered unseen forces, the origin of life, and their place in the cosmos. Observation, reflection, and experimentation were guided by both necessity and awe, cultivating the first philosophical and ethical reasoning alongside practical skill. Spiritual belief, intertwined with social organization, innovation, and environmental understanding, created a holistic framework that informed behavior, reinforced community, and shaped identity. As people observed the sun rise and set, the moon wax and wane, and the seasons flow, they internalized lessons of continuity, interdependence, and the rhythm of life. Through ritual, story, and symbol, they encoded knowledge of survival, ethics, and meaning, weaving a tapestry that connected generations, guided daily life, and provided comfort in uncertainty. Early religion and beliefs, humble yet profound, became the invisible scaffold supporting ethical, social, and intellectual life. It linked individuals to their community, their environment, and their ancestors, providing both structure and inspiration. In these practices, humans discovered the profound interconnection of existence, the need for cooperation, respect, and foresight, and the enduring power of shared meaning. the first sparks of spiritual consciousness illuminated human life, creating a sense of purpose, cohesion, and wonder that would guide communities through the challenges of survival, growth, and civilization. As humans settled into villages and cultivated both land and community, the desire to express experience, emotion, and imagination began to manifest in ways that transcended mere survival. Art, music, and other forms of expression emerged not as necessities, but as extensions of the human spirit, offering channels to communicate, commemorate, and connect. The earliest art took shape in caves, on rocks, in the soil, or on crafted surfaces such as wood, clay, and bone. Humans depicted animals, hunting scenes, landscapes, and abstract patterns, translating observation and imagination into visual form. Each stroke, engraving, or impression carried intention, conveying not only the tangible world, but also stories, beliefs, and emotional resonance. Color was derived from natural pigments, earth, charcoal, and minerals, each applied with care and deliberation. The choice of materials and techniques reflected observation, experimentation, and a growing understanding of permanence, visibility, and aesthetic impact. Art became a medium of memory as well as identity. Scenes of hunts, communal gatherings, and ritual performances recorded experience, preserving the knowledge and accomplishments of the community. These visual narratives taught lessons, reinforced social norms, and celebrated collective effort, linking aesthetic creation with both education and memory. Music emerged alongside visual art, often inseparable from ritual and communal activity. Early instruments included flutes made from bone or wood, percussive objects such as drums and rattles, and simple stringed devices. Music accompanied labor, ritual, storytelling, and leisure, establishing rhythm, mood, and cohesion. Through song and instrument, humans communicated not only practical information, but emotion, aspiration, and shared identity. Rhythm, repetition, and melody facilitated memory, coordination, and cooperation, while fostering emotional expression and reflection. Dance often complemented both art and music, creating a multi-sensory form of storytelling and communal bonding. Movement, synchronized with rhythm, embodied narrative, spiritual belief, and social structure. Communities discovered that expressive acts reinforced unity, transmitted knowledge, and nurtured well-being, as the shared experience of music, movement, and visual representation strengthened bonds between individuals and generations. Creativity also encouraged observation and innovation. Humans learned to notice patterns, refine technique, and experiment with materials and methods. The interplay of imagination and practicality led to new forms of decoration, design, and aesthetic sophistication. Pottery, tools, ornaments, and clothing became canvases for artistic expression, blending functionality with beauty and social meaning. Art served both personal and collective purposes. Individuals could express emotion, mark identity, and commemorate events, while communities used symbolic imagery, motifs, and performance to reinforce culture, transmit values, and maintain cohesion. Stories depicted visually or musically preserved history, ethical guidance, and cosmological understanding. Symbolism played a central role in expression. Visual motifs, musical patterns, and rhythmic gestures encoded meaning beyond literal representation, conveying belief, intent, and communal memory. Humans learned to interpret and innovate within these systems, refining communication, imagination, and cognitive flexibility. Emotional resonance was intrinsic to early expression. Art and music evoked wonder, empathy, joy, fear, and reverence, fostering introspection, shared understanding, and social harmony. These aesthetic experiences nurtured moral reflection, imagination, and emotional intelligence, reinforcing both individual and collective resilience. Expression also supported education and socialization. Children observed adults crafting, performing, and creating, internalizing skills, aesthetics, and social meaning. Participation in art and music cultivated dexterity, coordination, observation, memory, and creativity, integrating practical, cognitive, and emotional development into daily life. Ceremonial contexts amplified the impact of art and music. Rituals, festivals, and communal gatherings featured songs, dances, visual displays, and storytelling, embedding ethical, spiritual, and historical knowledge within engaging, participatory experience. Through these acts, humans reinforced cohesion, transmitted tradition, and celebrated both life and community. Material culture became a repository of expression. Carved figurines, painted pottery, woven textiles, and decorated tools communicated identity, status, or spiritual significance. Ornamentation was both aesthetic and functional, integrating beauty into practical life. This fusion reinforced the inseparability of creativity, labor, and social meaning. Observation of the natural world inspired both content and technique. The movement of animals, the flow of rivers, the patterns of stars, and the changing seasons informed imagery, rhythm, and narrative. Humans translated observation into representation, experimentation, and abstraction, developing aesthetic and cognitive sophistication. The act of creation was itself transformative. Through carving, painting, shaping, and performing, humans experienced mastery, reflection, and agency. Creative acts nurtured patience, focus, and subtlety, while offering pleasure, meaning, and communal recognition. Shared expression encouraged empathy and communication. Visual and musical narratives allowed individuals to convey experiences, desires, and emotions to others, fostering understanding, connection, and collaboration. Communities thrived when members participated in aesthetic activity, as it reinforced bonds, memory, and shared identity. Innovation emerged from experimentation and interaction. Techniques improved over generations, instruments evolved, motifs multiplied, and performance styles diversified. Knowledge of materials, rhythm, proportion, and symbolism was transmitted and refined, embedding cumulative cultural wisdom into daily practice. Play and imagination were intertwined with expression. Humans engaged in improvisation, mimicry, and experimentation, exploring possibilities, testing ideas, and discovering novel combinations. These playful acts nurtured creativity, resilience, and cognitive flexibility, contributing to both personal development and communal enrichment. Art, music, and expression were inseparable from spiritual and ethical life. Songs, visual representations, and performances reinforced ritual, belief, and moral guidance. The aesthetic dimension of life was woven seamlessly into survival, labor, and social cohesion, creating a holistic experience of existence. Expression preserved memory and continuity. Generations could recall past events, celebrate achievements, mourn loss, and transmit wisdom through artistic and musical forms. These repositories of culture ensured that knowledge, identity, and social norms endured beyond the lifespan of any individual. Through aesthetic engagement, humans cultivated observation, empathy, imagination, and communication, expanding both individual and communal capacity. Visual motifs, melodic patterns, and rhythmic gestures became intertwined with social, ethical, and spiritual knowledge, reinforcing the integration of practical and symbolic understanding. Over time, art and music facilitated innovation in other domains. Observation of materials, experimentation with form, and coordination in performance informed toolmaking, construction, planning, and problem-solving. The mind trained in creativity approached challenges with flexibility, foresight, and ingenuity. Expression fostered emotional resilience and well-being. Engaging in art, music, and performance offered outlets for reflection, joy, mourning, and celebration, supporting both individual mental balance and social harmony. Communities recognized the value of these practices, encouraging participation, guidance, and apprenticeship. The emergence of art, music, and expression marked a pivotal moment in human development. Humans discovered that survival was not only physical and practical, but intellectual, emotional, and aesthetic. Creativity became inseparable from daily life, identity, and community. Each painting, carving, song, or dance carried intention, memory, and meaning, weaving individuals into the tapestry of collective experience. Through these expressive acts, humans celebrated existence, reinforced cohesion, transmitted knowledge, and nurtured imagination. Art, music, and expression became the invisible threads that connected people across space and time, creating a living culture capable of growth, innovation, and endurance. These creative practices, humble in origin yet profound in consequence, laid the foundation for civilization's capacity to dream, reflect, and transform, ensuring that the human spirit was as vital to survival as food, water, and shelter, and that through expression, communities could thrive, imagine, and endure, leaving a legacy of beauty, wisdom, and shared experience that would resonate for generations yet to come. As settlements expanded and communities stabilized along fertile plains, rivers, and coastal regions, humans discovered that no single village could produce all that it required. Some areas were rich in stone suitable for tools, others abundant in clay for pottery, fertile soil for grains, or forests for timber and fibers. The recognition of differing resources, coupled with the desire for variety, surplus, and specialized goods, naturally led to the emergence of trade and exchange, subtle yet transformative forces that would shape early economic life. At first, trade was direct and personal, a barter of goods and services between neighboring communities. Grains were exchanged for tools, hides for pottery, or fish for woven baskets. These transactions were governed by social norms, trust, and mutual recognition of value, ensuring fairness and the reinforcement of relationships. Trade required observation, negotiation, and an understanding of equivalence. Humans learned to assess the quantity, quality, and utility of goods, weighing needs, surplus, and anticipated future benefit. Through repeated interaction, standards of value emerged, and conventions developed to facilitate equitable exchange. As commerce expanded, individuals emerged as intermediaries, traveling between villages to acquire, distribute, and trade goods. These early traders cultivated skills in negotiation, observation, and adaptation, becoming repositories of knowledge about resources, geography, and social networks. Travel, even over short distances, required planning, trust, and resilience, reinforcing coordination and communal relationships along the routes. Surplus played a crucial role. The ability to produce more than immediate consumption enabled storage, strategic exchange, and risk mitigation. Communities could buffer against seasonal scarcity, trade for missing resources, and plan for population growth. Storage technologies, such as clay containers, pits, or elevated platforms, facilitated the preservation of grains, seeds, and other perishable goods, extending the temporal and spatial reach of economic activity. Exchange fostered specialization. Individuals devoted themselves to particular crafts, agriculture, or resource management, confident that their products could be traded for other necessities. This division of labor increased efficiency, skill, and innovation, allowing communities to accomplish more collectively than any single member could achieve. Trade networks gradually expanded, linking settlements along rivers, valleys, and coastal areas. Knowledge of routes, seasons, resources, and social expectations became critical, forming the basis for communication, planning, and coordination. These networks facilitated not only the movement of goods, but also ideas, techniques, and cultural practices, accelerating social and technological development. Trust and reputation were central to early economy. Traders and communities maintained relationships based on honesty, fairness, and consistency. Violations of trust could lead to exclusion, conflict, or loss of access to vital resources, reinforcing the importance of ethical conduct and social norms within economic interactions. Ritual and social practices intersected with trade. Ceremonies, gift exchanges, and communal feasts often accompanied or facilitated commercial activity, embedding economic interaction within social, ethical, and spiritual frameworks. Trade was not merely transactional, it reinforced alliances, social cohesion, and mutual recognition. Observation and innovation were central to economic success. Humans learned to identify high-quality materials, predict demand, and optimize production and transport methods. Tools for harvesting, storage, and transport were refined, while techniques for preservation, crafting, and valuation evolved, creating cumulative knowledge that supported both survival and prosperity. Markets, in their earliest form, emerged as temporary gatherings or designated spaces where multiple communities exchanged goods, shared information, and observed practices. These gatherings were more than commercial. They were social events, facilitating news, cultural exchange, negotiation, and cooperation. Currency, in its embryonic form, appeared as symbolic items recognized for their value, such as shells, beads, or standardized objects. While barter remained central, these tokens simplified exchange, facilitated trade over distance, and introduced abstraction into economic thought, teaching humans to think in terms of value, equivalence, and negotiation. Risk management became essential. Traders accounted for spoilage, theft, environmental hazards, and social conflict, planning routes, quantities, and timing carefully. These practices fostered foresight, prudence, and adaptive strategies, reinforcing both individual skill and communal stability. The early economy intertwined with governance and social organization. Leaders and elders guided distribution, mediated disputes, and ensured adherence to agreements. Governance structures provided predictability, reducing conflict and facilitating cooperation, while enabling ambitious communal projects and sustained trade networks. Cultural and artistic expression were linked to economic activity. Decorative objects, ornaments, and crafted items were traded not only for utility, but also for status, identity, and symbolic meaning. Trade thus reinforced both material and cultural cohesion, transmitting aesthetic and social knowledge alongside goods. Children observed trade, imitation, and negotiation, internalizing principles of value, fairness, and strategy. Through participation, storytelling, and apprenticeship, knowledge accumulated and was refined across generations, creating continuity, skill, and collective memory. Trade encouraged exploration and mobility. Humans traversed rivers, valleys, and coastlines in pursuit of goods, knowledge, and opportunity. These journeys expanded awareness of geography, resources, and neighboring cultures, fostering adaptability, resilience, and intercultural exchange. The economy also shaped social hierarchy and specialization. Skilled artisans, successful traders, and resourceful planners gained recognition, influence, and responsibility. Their expertise contributed to communal welfare, innovation, and the preservation of knowledge, reinforcing merit-based authority within early society. Observation guided innovation in economic activity. Humans noted patterns of demand, resource abundance, seasonal cycles, and community needs. These insights informed production, storage, and exchange, enabling more strategic and efficient allocation of labor and materials. Surplus and trade facilitated long-term planning. Communities could invest in agriculture, tools, infrastructure, and social projects, confident that exchange and storage would buffer uncertainty. These practices nurtured foresight, organization, and collective ambition. Communication was essential. Trade networks relied on language, gesture, and shared understanding. Knowledge of routes, valuation, and etiquette ensured success, while miscommunication could compromise both individual and communal welfare. Reinforcing the importance of coordination and clarity, trade fostered cooperation and diplomacy. Relationships between settlements were strengthened through repeated exchange, gift-giving, and mutual reliance. Conflicts were often mediated or averted by interdependence, creating stability, trust, and shared benefit across regions. Early economic activity intertwined with spiritual and ethical frameworks. Offerings, ritual exchange, and ceremonies reinforced moral conduct, trustworthiness, and community cohesion, linking material prosperity with social and spiritual integrity. Knowledge transmission ensured continuity. Skills in crafting, production, storage, and negotiation were passed through observation, apprenticeship, and communal instruction, embedding economic wisdom into culture, identity, and daily life. Communities learned that prosperity depended not only on labor, but also on fairness, foresight, creativity, and collaboration. Trade and exchange multiplied human capability, enabling specialization, innovation, cultural transmission, and growth. Surplus, planning, and cooperation became foundational to the expansion of civilization, preparing communities for larger settlements, more complex social structures, and increasingly sophisticated economic systems. Over time, early trade and economy created an intricate web of interdependence, knowledge, and cultural transmission, linking human survival, social cohesion, and creative expression. The rhythm of exchange, observation, negotiation, and innovation became embedded in daily life, shaping not only material wealth, but social structures, ethical conduct, and collective memory. Through trade, humans discovered that cooperation multiplied potential, foresight enabled stability, and shared endeavor produced both security and opportunity. Early economy was the invisible current that carried communities from simple subsistence toward organized, interconnected, and resilient societies, laying the groundwork for the flourishing of culture, knowledge, and civilization itself. As human communities grew in size, complexity, and interdependence, the limitations of memory and oral transmission became increasingly apparent. While storytelling, ritual, and communal memory had long preserved knowledge, the demands of trade, governance, resource management, and social coordination required a more precise, durable, and scalable means of communication. From this necessity emerged the earliest forms of writing and record-keeping, subtle yet transformative inventions that would permanently alter human history. Early inscriptions began as pictographs, simple, recognizable symbols representing tangible objects, such as animals, tools, or quantities of grain. These symbols were etched into clay, carved into stone, or painted on surfaces, providing a visual shorthand for recording transactions, events, and instructions. Each mark was deliberate, a conscious effort to capture and transmit meaning across space and time, allowing humans to externalize memory and share it with others beyond immediate conversation. Over time, pictographs evolved into more abstract ideograms, representing ideas, actions, or categories, rather than only concrete objects. This abstraction allowed for more complex communication, enabling humans to encode not just material records, but also social obligations, legal decrees, and ritual practices. Writing became indispensable in administration. Leaders, elders, and scribes used inscriptions to record trade, allocate resources, and track labor, ensuring fairness, accountability, and continuity. Written records preserved agreements, inventories, and distributions, reducing disputes and reinforcing trust within and between communities. Communication through writing enabled coordination over distance. Traders, envoys, and officials could convey information accurately across villages, valleys, and river routes, facilitating commerce, diplomacy, and collaboration. Written messages complemented oral communication, ensuring consistency, clarity, and the capacity to manage complex social networks. The development of symbols and scripts demanded cognitive flexibility, observation, and standardization. Communities refined signs, conventions, and sequences, creating a shared system that could be interpreted reliably by multiple individuals. This collective understanding of meaning, form, and function was the foundation of literacy, education, and cultural transmission. Record-keeping extended to agriculture, resource management, and environmental observation. Clay tokens, notched sticks, and early ledgers documented harvests, storage, and distribution, embedding practical knowledge within tangible artifacts. These practices enabled humans to anticipate scarcity, plan surplus, and allocate labor efficiently, integrating writing into survival and growth. Scribes and record keepers emerged as specialists, preserving, interpreting, and transmitting knowledge. Their role required meticulous observation, dexterity, memory, and an understanding of communal norms. By maintaining continuity, accuracy, and accessibility, they became indispensable to governance, trade, and cultural cohesion. Writing facilitated the codification of law, ethics, and social norms. Rules could be recorded, preserved, and referenced, reducing ambiguity, promoting fairness, and strengthening social cohesion. Written decrees and agreements communicated expectations, responsibilities, and consequences, supporting governance, mediation, and collective decision-making. Storytelling and literature were transformed by writing. Oral narratives, myths, and historical accounts could be documented, refined, and transmitted across generations with greater fidelity. Written texts preserved cultural memory, ethical guidance, and communal identity, allowing future generations to learn from, reflect on, and expand upon the knowledge of their predecessors. Symbolic communication extended to ritual and spirituality. Written symbols encoded sacred narratives, calendrical events, and ceremonial instructions, ensuring consistency, precision, and continuity in religious practice. This connection between literacy, memory, and ritual reinforced both spiritual and social cohesion. Writing also encouraged abstraction, analysis, and planning. By representing quantities, sequences, and concepts visually, humans could perform calculations, forecast outcomes, and strategize for complex endeavors. The capacity to externalize thought enhanced problem-solving, innovation, and foresight, multiplying human capability. Trade and economic activity benefited enormously from writing. Inventories, contracts, and shipment records ensured clarity, accountability, and fairness. Standardized symbols facilitated communication across regions, enabling intervillage and long-distance trade networks to flourish, while supporting negotiations, value assessment, and risk management. Communication expanded beyond local communities. Written messages, symbols, and ledgers enabled humans to coordinate with distant settlements, allies, and partners, transmitting not only material records, but ideas, norms, and cultural practices. Writing became a bridge across space and time, connecting people, communities, and knowledge. Education and apprenticeship grew around writing. Young learners observed, copied, and practiced inscriptions under the guidance of experienced scribes, internalizing techniques, symbols, and conventions. Literacy became a skill intertwined with social status, responsibility, and community participation, fostering both individual growth and collective continuity. Observation and innovation fueled the evolution of scripts. Pictographs gradually became abstract symbols representing syllables, sounds, or concepts. This innovation enabled humans to convey more complex ideas, record events with nuance, and facilitate more sophisticated administration, storytelling, and instruction. Written communication reduced reliance on memory alone. Complex calculations, inventories, genealogies, and historical sequences could be preserved accurately, allowing communities to manage greater complexity, plan for longer time horizons, and mitigate the risk of human error. The interplay of writing, memory, and social structure transformed daily life. Leaders and elders could make informed decisions based on recorded data. Trade networks could expand with confidence in accuracy, and rituals could be conducted consistently with reference to documented traditions. Writing also inspired creativity and reflection. Humans recorded observations, ideas, and experiences, experimenting with narrative, symbolism, and style. Written texts became repositories not only of practical knowledge, but of culture, imagination, and ethical insight, enabling cumulative development across generations. Record-keeping fostered accountability and transparency. Communities could monitor production, distribution, and labor, reducing conflict and ensuring fairness. Written agreements provided a reference for disputes, reinforcing trust, cooperation, and governance. Communication was enriched by symbols, gestures, and emerging scripts, allowing humans to encode both immediate instructions and complex abstract ideas. This multi-dimensional system strengthened coordination, social cohesion, and cultural transmission. Writing became an instrument of memory, planning, and identity. Records preserved seasonal cycles, agricultural data, trade agreements, social obligations, and historical events. These inscriptions connected individual effort to collective purpose, ensuring that human knowledge could persist beyond the limitations of lifespan and oral memory. Early scripts nurtured observation, abstraction, and cognitive growth. Humans learned to conceptualize sequences, categories, and relationships, enhancing analytical thinking, problem-solving, and foresight. Literacy thus became inseparable from both practical and intellectual development. Written communication transformed the rhythm of daily life. Tasks could be scheduled, resources allocated, and knowledge transmitted systematically, increasing efficiency, stability, and communal coordination. Humans discovered that memory could be externalized, ideas recorded, and culture preserved with unprecedented fidelity. Over time, writing became the invisible infrastructure of civilization. It linked governance, economy, ritual, and culture, enabling humans to coordinate action, transmit knowledge, and cultivate shared identity. The capacity to encode, preserve, and communicate information allowed societies to expand, innovate, and endure, laying the foundation for literature, law, scholarship, and history itself. Through writing, humans bridge the ephemeral with the enduring, connecting thought, action, and memory across generations, ensuring that knowledge, creativity, and social cohesion could persist, flourish, and guide the development of civilization for millennia to come. And as scribes traced symbols onto clay, stone, and papyrus, the collective memory of humanity began to take shape, recording not only what was seen, but what was imagined, learned, and dreamed, establishing an enduring foundation for culture, communication, and the legacy of civilization itself. As human settlements expanded and societies grew in complexity, the need for rules, order, and mechanisms of justice became increasingly apparent. While communal norms, oral agreements, and mutual understanding had long guided behavior, the accumulation of property, specialization of labor, and interaction between distinct communities necessitated more formalized systems to maintain harmony and ensure fairness. Early law emerged as a codified reflection of collective values, practical necessity, and ethical reasoning, subtle yet profound instruments that guided human conduct and social organization. Communities observed the consequences of conflict, inequity, and disorder, realizing that unresolved disputes could threaten survival, cohesion, and prosperity. Leaders, elders, and respected figures began to mediate disagreements, establish boundaries, and create predictable rules, ensuring that cooperation remained feasible and relationships durable. Justice was inseparable from morality, social norms, and communal well-being. Transgressions against individuals, property, or the environment were not merely personal grievances, but matters of collective concern. Punishment, restitution, and reconciliation served not only to correct behavior, but also to reinforce communal values, maintain trust, and preserve stability. Mechanisms for enforcement were diverse and adaptive. Some communities relied on public deliberation, witness testimony, and consensus decision-making, while others codified rules in tangible forms such as inscriptions, symbols, or oral formulas memorized by designated individuals. Transparency and shared understanding were critical, ensuring that all members recognized expectations, consequences, and the authority of enforcers. Early legal systems addressed both interpersonal and collective concerns. Issues of property, labor, trade, inheritance, and resource allocation were codified alongside rules governing behavior, ethics, and ritual obligations. The intertwining of practical necessity with moral reasoning created systems that were coherent, resilient, and widely respected. Elders and adjudicators held dual authority derived from experience and social recognition. Their role demanded judgment, impartiality, and an understanding of precedent, community norms, and consequences. Through observation, negotiation, and ritualized decision-making, they ensured that justice served both the individual and the collective, reinforcing cohesion and stability. Codification and memorization of rules enabled communities to standardize expectations, reducing disputes and misinterpretation. Written laws, when available, provided permanence, clarity, and reference across time, while oral traditions ensured accessibility, flexibility, and communal engagement. Punishment and restitution were guided by proportionality, intent, and circumstance. Retributive, compensatory, and reconciliatory practices addressed harm while reinforcing social bonds, ethical principles, and trust, creating a system that balanced accountability with restoration. Festivals, assemblies, and ceremonial gatherings often integrated legal deliberation, reinforcing communal awareness, participation, and moral education. By embedding justice within social and ritual contexts, communities ensured that rules were respected, internalized, and reinforced across generations. Trade, property, and resource management highlighted the importance of law. Surplus, specialization, and inter-settlement interaction required agreements, contracts, and enforceable norms to prevent conflict, maintain fairness, and facilitate cooperation. Legal frameworks evolved in tandem with economic complexity, adapting to new challenges, opportunities, and relationships. Observation and precedent shaped early justice. Elders and leaders drew upon experience, outcomes of prior disputes, and community feedback to guide decisions, ensuring that judgments were informed, equitable, and respected. This iterative process nurtured consistency, trust, and the evolution of ethical standards. Conflict resolution extended beyond punishment. Mediation, negotiation, apology, and restitution emphasized reconciliation, social repair, and the restoration of harmony. Communities recognized that enduring peace required both deterrence and repair, balancing justice with compassion and foresight. Legal principles were intertwined with spirituality and ritual. Sacred narratives, divine authority, and ceremonial acts reinforced rules, moral expectations, and ethical behavior, linking temporal order with cosmic or spiritual order. This fusion strengthened compliance, moral reflection, and communal cohesion. Record-keeping supported justice. Written or symbolic documentation of transactions, agreements, disputes, and resolutions provided evidence, reference, and continuity, ensuring that judgments were consistent, transparent, and enforceable. Early law fostered social identity and cohesion. Rules delineated rights, responsibilities, and expectations, creating shared understanding, mutual accountability, and a sense of collective belonging, while mitigating the potential for arbitrary or chaotic behavior. Education and apprenticeship transmitted knowledge of laws and ethical norms. Children and younger members learned through observation, participation, and instruction, internalizing standards, principles, and practical reasoning, ensuring continuity, coherence, and stability across generations. Dispute resolution emphasized proportionality and fairness. Leaders considered intent, harm, and circumstance, balancing individual needs with collective welfare. Restitution, symbolic acts, and reconciliation ceremonies provided closure, reinforced trust, and maintained harmony. Early legal systems nurtured foresight and prudence. Communities recognized patterns of behavior, anticipated potential conflicts, and implemented preventative measures, embedding strategy, observation, and ethical reflection into governance and social organization. Cooperation and negotiation were reinforced by law. Agreements, contracts, and enforceable norms facilitated trade, labor, and communal projects, aligning individual incentives with collective goals and creating stability for growth, innovation, and cultural development. Law also guided moral reasoning and ethical behavior. Beyond practical enforcement, codified and customary rules cultivated reflection, empathy and responsibility, shaping character, social interaction, and communal values. Ritual and ceremony enhanced the authority and legitimacy of justice. Public adjudication, oath-taking, and symbolic acts reinforced the social significance of law, ensuring respect, comprehension, and continuity. Communities recognized that order was not solely enforced by authority, but sustained by shared belief, trust, and participation. Early governance integrated law, social structure, and ethics. Leaders balanced authority, experience, and moral insight, coordinating labor, resolving disputes, regulating trade, and preserving harmony, ensuring that social and material systems were aligned with communal values. Observation and adaptation refined justice. Precedent, negotiation, and reflection informed decisions, allowing communities to respond to changing circumstances, resources, population dynamics, and inter-community interaction, while preserving fairness and stability. Law, order, and early justice thus became inseparable from daily life, ethical reflection, and communal survival. They provided a framework that ensured predictability, fairness, and cooperation, while nurturing trust, empathy, and social cohesion. Over generations, these systems evolved in complexity, codifying knowledge, resolving conflict, and guiding behavior, laying the foundation for governance, administration, and the social contracts essential to the flourishing of civilization. Through law and justice, humans discovered that survival depended not only on skill, labor, and resources, but also on fairness, foresight, and collective ethical reasoning. And as these principles were observed, enforced, and transmitted, communities grew resilient, cohesive, and capable of sustaining the intricate web of cooperation and culture that defined early civilization, ensuring that the delicate balance of human interaction, trust, and responsibility became the invisible current sustaining progress, security, and harmony across generations. And in this way, the first sparks of structured society illuminated the path from scattered settlements to organized, enduring communities that could thrive, innovate, and endure amidst the challenges of an ever-changing world. As human societies settled into villages and cities, the natural world became both a source of sustenance and a realm of curiosity, prompting observation, experimentation, and the systematic accumulation of knowledge. Early humans discovered patterns in the seasons, the movement of celestial bodies, the growth of plants, the behavior of animals, and the cycles of water and weather, and they learned to interpret these patterns to survive, plan, and thrive. Observation was at the heart of early science, a meticulous process of noting cause and effect. Correlation and repetition. Hunters tracked animal behavior. Farmers noted rainfall and soil fertility, and healers observed the effects of plants and remedies, gradually building a repository of practical knowledge that guided daily life. Trial and error shaped understanding. Humans experimented with planting methods, tool design, preservation of food, and treatment of ailments, refining techniques based on success and failure. These iterative processes nurtured reasoning, adaptation, and problem-solving, forming the basis of empirical inquiry. Patterns were recognized across space and time. Communities observed celestial cycles, seasonal changes, and environmental regularities, enabling the prediction of weather, harvest times, and animal migration. These insights were codified through oral traditions, symbolic representations, and later, written records, creating continuity and shared understanding across generations. Early humans developed a practical mathematics rooted in counting, measurement, and proportion. Quantities of grain, length of tools, depth of water, and distances traveled were recorded using tokens, notches, and symbols, facilitating planning, trade, construction, and resource management. Knowledge was communicated and preserved through multiple channels. Storytelling, ritual, song, visual symbols, and early writing enabled the transmission of insights, techniques, and observations, ensuring that vital information endured beyond individual memory and could be shared widely. Experimentation extended to materials and technology. Humans discovered that certain stones produce sharper edges, metals could be melted and shaped, and plant fibers could be woven for strength and flexibility. Observation and manipulation of natural phenomena fostered both ingenuity and innovation, gradually expanding the range of tools, shelter, and utility. Astronomy and timekeeping emerged from attentive observation of the sun, moon, stars, and seasons. Calendrical systems enabled agriculture, ritual scheduling, and coordination across communities, demonstrating how careful observation of the natural world could serve practical, social, and spiritual purposes. Early medicine reflected empirical reasoning. Observation of injuries, illness, and the effects of herbs, poultices, and other remedies informed methods of care. Techniques were refined, documented, and transmitted, creating a foundation for the systematic study of the human body, health, and healing practices. Environmental knowledge guided settlement, agriculture, and resource management. Communities identified fertile soils, abundant water sources, and favorable climates, while avoiding hazards such as floods, predators, or infertile land. This observational intelligence enabled sustainability, efficiency, and resilience in the face of change. Recording and categorizing knowledge became a priority. Humans organized observations of plants, animals, weather patterns, celestial movements, and social behavior into categories, enabling recognition of patterns, predictions, and decision-making that extended beyond immediate perception. Early experimentation nurtured creativity and abstract thought. By manipulating materials, testing hypotheses, and predicting outcomes, humans exercised imagination, reasoning, and foresight. Successes and failures were documented and transmitted, embedding scientific thinking into cultural memory. Communication of knowledge fostered collaboration. Observations shared among community members allowed for collective problem-solving, refinement of techniques, and the advancement of practical understanding. Wisdom accumulated cumulatively, with each generation building upon the discoveries of the previous, enabling progressive improvement in tools, agriculture, construction, and social organization. Observation inspired technological development. Understanding the properties of wood, stone, clay, metal, and fibers enabled humans to innovate tools, dwellings, containers, and instruments. These innovations increased efficiency, safety, and capacity for growth, reinforcing the link between knowledge and practical life. Experimentation and empirical thinking were embedded in ritual and daily practice. Seasonal ceremonies, agricultural cycles, hunting expeditions, and communal labor provided opportunities to test ideas, record outcomes, and refine strategies, integrating observation into routine life. Early humans recognized cause and effect relationships in natural phenomena. Patterns of rainfall, flooding, plant growth, animal behavior, and celestial movements were interpreted to anticipate events, make decisions, and mitigate risk, reflecting an emergent scientific mindset. Collaboration amplified understanding. Knowledge shared between hunters, farmers, artisans, and healers created a complex, interconnected understanding of the environment, resources, and social dynamics, enabling communities to thrive and innovate collectively. Tools of observation and measurement evolved. Simple devices, such as marked sticks, containers, rudimentary scales, or aligned stones, allowed humans to quantify, track, and predict phenomena, laying groundwork for precision, analysis, and abstraction. The drive to understand nature led to philosophical reflection. Humans asked questions about causality, change, and order, seeking explanations for life, death, and the forces governing the world. Early science was inseparable from curiosity, imagination, and the search for meaning, blending observation with reflection and insight. Knowledge guided survival and risk management, understanding which plants were edible, which animals were dangerous, when to plant or harvest, and how to construct safe shelter enabled humans to mitigate uncertainty, increase efficiency, and thrive in a variable environment. Experimentation nurtured resilience and adaptability. When methods failed or conditions changed, humans observed, adjusted, and innovated, cultivating flexibility, foresight, and practical intelligence that enhance both individual and collective survival. Documentation extended observation across time. Oral traditions, symbols, and early writing preserved knowledge of techniques, events, and patterns, ensuring that wisdom could be transmitted, revisited, and refined over generations, building cumulative cultural and scientific understanding. Observation led to categorization and classification. Humans distinguished edible from poisonous plants, prey from predators, seasons from anomalies, and beneficial from harmful behaviors, enabling predictive reasoning, informed decision-making, and strategic planning. Knowledge influenced social organization and specialization. Individuals with expertise in hunting, farming, healing, or tool-making were recognized, valued, and often tasked with teaching, guiding, or innovating, embedding scientific thinking into social structure. Experimentation extended to materials, energy, and mechanics. Humans tested flammability, buoyancy, leverage, and durability, discovering principles of cause and effect that informed construction, transport, and problem-solving, creating early technological literacy. Science and observation nurtured curiosity, wonder, and reflection. By noticing patterns, experimenting, and predicting outcomes, humans developed imagination, reasoning, and insight, linking practical skill with cognitive and emotional development. Early knowledge systems integrated with ritual, myth, and storytelling. Symbolic narratives encoded observations, predictions, and lessons, allowing communities to preserve empirical insights within culturally resonant forms, combining accuracy with memory, meaning, and engagement. Observation fostered intergenerational learning. Elders conveyed practical wisdom, techniques, and patterns to younger members through demonstration, storytelling, and apprenticeship, ensuring continuity, refinement, and expansion of understanding. Early science cultivated abstraction and prediction. By representing quantities, sequences, and causal relationships symbolically or conceptually, humans could plan, coordinate, and innovate with foresight, extending capability beyond immediate perception. Communities discovered that systematic observation, experimentation, and record-keeping enabled resilience, growth, and coordination. Scientific reasoning became embedded in daily life, guiding agriculture, medicine, technology, and social organization, while fostering curiosity, reflection, and collective wisdom. Over generations, these practices accumulated, refined, and transmitted knowledge, creating a foundation for increasingly sophisticated understanding of nature, human society, and the cosmos, ensuring that observation, reasoning, and inquiry became inseparable from the trajectory of civilization. Through attention, experimentation, and reflection, humans transformed experience into knowledge, intuition into principle, and observation into innovation, weaving an enduring tapestry of insight, practical skill, and collective wisdom that would carry civilizations forward, shaping the course of history, culture, and human potential. And as each discovery, refinement, and recorded insight was shared and transmitted, the seeds of scientific thought, analytical reasoning, and systematic knowledge laid the invisible yet indispensable groundwork for all future learning, exploration, and the flourishing of human understanding.